Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to take you through my new track, Journey. It's out now on my Journey EP on 8-Bit Records, the label from Gorge and Nick Curly, and one of my personal favourites. So something really important about this track that I'll get into in more detail in the project is that it's really important to not overthink things and to really kind of follow your instincts. This is a lesson that I learned again with this track. If you like the track and you want to support it, then there's a link in the description to Beatport and Spotify where you can download or stream it. And if you like the content that I'm doing in the channel, the best way you can support is through Patreon. There's a link for that in the description as well. Let's jump into Ableton and see how I made this bad boy. Alright, so here we are inside Ableton, and this is the project for Journey, previously called The Journey, as you can see. But on the EP, I had another track called The Station. I didn't want two tracks with the at the start, so I just shortened it to Journey. Fun fact. Alright, so the first thing I want to show you is the evolution of the track. So basically, the way I work is I write a bunch of sketches, and I do this very quickly, and it's really just kind of throwing down some ideas. What I'm trying to focus on there is getting some kind of hook, some kind of idea for the track, like the substance of the track, the part of the track that's memorable. What I'll do is I'll generally do this in a session from 1 to 2 hours, normally 1.5 or 2 hours. And I'll just kind of, maybe in one day, I'll do 3 sketches. Maybe in over 2 days, I'll do like 6 sketches. And then I listen back to those sketches and I choose the best ones to work on. I'll try to develop them, and the kind of reasoning for this is that I want to focus my efforts on getting the best result. And my reason for this is I want to give myself as much opportunity to be creative and come up with different unique ideas, but then focus on the tracks that are likely to give me the best results and get the best outcome. Also the ones that I feel like I'm least likely to get stuck on, because that's no fun. So let's have a listen here to the Journey 1.0. So this is the first sketch that I did. So you can hear kind of like the basic foundation of the track there. I haven't added the kind of piano hooks, but I've got the vocal hook and some kind of bass line structure and a bit of a drum groove. So then this would be session 2, where I've listened back to it and I've decided to invest another session into developing the idea. So you can see there I've added the piano, and that's kind of like the substance of the track, I guess. Then I've done another session, 1.2. So there I've changed the piano and added this like big intense hit, which I quite like. It hasn't, but I don't feel like overall it's developed better than it was in 1.1. I think what was happening is like I was getting a bit scared the piano was maybe too cheesy. As you'll see in the next sketch, which I developed a bit further, 1.3. So kind of going in a much more deep progressive direction, and that's what I felt like I needed to do for the track to make it more engaging, emotional, and not, like I said, I think I was worried about it being cheesy or something. But at that point, it never really caught me. I didn't really know what to do. I felt a bit frustrated with it. So I ended up leaving it for, I think, like 8 months, and it was just like in my folder of sketches, and I'd go back and listen to it and go, I like that track, I've got to get on and finish it at some point, but I wasn't really sure what to do. So at some point I started version 2. So you can hear it's got the same kind of foundation, but then I've added this new vocal. I've toned back the pianos a bit, added a couple of elements that kind of made it into the final version. But what I did is I went back and listened to all of these sketches and went, right, the most compelling to me was, I think, was it version 1.1? And then I thought to myself, well, if I take that and I add some of the additional parts that I've put into version 2, but maintain that original idea, as that was kind of the magic, the inspiration, the catalyst for everything, then it was an easy win. And basically what happened is at that point, I was like, right, I've got a clear path of how I'm going to finish this track. I did it in a day, sent it to Gorge and Nick from 8-Bit the following day, and they wrote me back in about 2 hours saying they wanted to sign it. So, it took me 8 months of second guessing myself to go back to the original idea that I'd had in the start, finish it and sign it. So there was a big lesson there for me as a producer that the most important thing I can do is just follow my instincts, don't second guess myself, get it done and just move on. All of this messing around and going off in different directions, sometimes it can work out, but 9 times out of 10, it's the original idea that had the most substance. Anyway, with that out of the way, I think let's jump in and I'll show you through the project. So this is the layout and arrangement here. You'll see I've got a reference track in here, which is Gorge. We start again. I'm not sure. I think I was using that as a reference in the mixdown, maybe. If we look, I haven't used the same kind of arrangement. I think that came in at the mixdown stage. But anyway, we've got a kick here. Big, chunky, kind of housey kick. Sampled it. I think it was stereo, and I've just taken the left signal. So this is what the right sounds like. So I want my kicks to be mono generally, and what I'll usually do this with the utility and just kind of, normally the left or right will kind of sound significantly better and significantly tighter. In this case it was the left. Then I've just cleaned up the sample a little bit to fit it into the track. I don't recall whether I did this at the mixing stage or not, but if I turn off these EQ points, so this number 3 here, this dip at 200 Hertz, I feel like it just tightens it up a bit. And then this number 6 here at 1.2K just like pulls in a bit of the knock. In another track, that might be exactly what you want, but for me, I felt like it was just kind of making the kick dominate a little bit too much. I'm pretty sure I did that at the mixing stage. And this rack here is just a filter. You can see I automate along the whole arrangement where I'm just taking out the low frequencies. So the reason for this rack as opposed to just using a filter is I've got quite a bit of resonance on this low cut, and because of the resonance it's increasing the volume, so I'm bringing down the volume to compensate. Also bringing down the volume a little bit extra so that it just really takes away the power of the kick, but you've still got the knock from it, and that kind of helps to work in the club and give the dance floor something to move to, but it doesn't have the kind of power and intensity of the main sub of the kick. So it just kind of makes it feel balanced, I feel like. That's the intention at least. So firstly, I'll show you kind of how I work when I'm coming up with ideas, or what I kind of work on first, right? So I've got the kick, I've got a clap here. Let's just loop around this section. So simple clap, I've got some Haas effect width on that, a little bit of clipping, just chopping off the top of the transient, and some reverb. Pretty subtle reverb. Okay, then hats. I start with an open hat. So in this case, I've used this disco top loop. Just gives it a really nice housey vibe. So that's something that I really like to do, is just kind of have these like main really important drums as I program them in MIDI, and I'm able to mix them like right in front and make sure that they just really punch through. And then I'll kind of augment that with some loops, some bits that add some vibe and some feel to the track. But I'm generally always making my main like backbeat the dominant force, the driving force of the track. If you've ever heard one of my tracks, you've probably noticed that I love congas. So I've got a conga loop in there. And this is from the same like disco themed pack, I believe. And I've just kind of EQ'd out some unneeded frequencies just to help it fit in and let the hats do the hats. And this is really just for this kind of midsection of the frequency spectrum where the percussion lies. What I don't want is to build up too much energy in the high frequencies, and then you either get like the hats. So what I want to avoid is building up too much high frequency. That can either cause one of two problems: that the hats sound really harsh and brittle, or that they sound really kind of mushy and undefined. And I'm not interested in either of those. So then I've got this top loop. I've just pulled in the envelope a little bit to tighten it up, and this is pretty subtle. So it's really subtle, low in the mix, just kind of thickening things up and filling in a little bit of space with some of these like offbeat hits. It's kind of like a vibe layer, let's say. Then I've got this shaker. Just got some side chain on that, helping it to groove and duck with the kick. The MIDI looks like this, and you can see here I've used this velocity to create this kind of like pumping rhythm. Cool. And we've got a tambourine. So the tambourine here is basically to add some additional energy in the high end. I'd basically either use a tambourine or a ride. I kind of see those two things as being quite interchangeable, just depending on the vibe of what I'm going for. This has got quite a fun, upbeat vibe on the kind of houseier side of deep house, I think. So just a loop basically with a bit of sidechain. So that's the drums. Not too complicated, right? So going back to my initial point, the elements I started with is basically this. And this bass line without the sub. And then I think I had this vocal, which was a bit more repetitive at the time. And then the piano was the next really important aspect of the track that I added. So you can hear there, I've got most of the things in the track turned off, but that is the track. And that's always what I'm going for when I'm writing music, is I want it to be like a really simple foundational idea that's strong enough to carry the rest of the track. And then I'll add little bits and pieces on top, but basically they're take it or leave it. You know, that is the track there. So now let's look at the bass line in a little bit more detail. So it's a patch from Trillion. If you've seen any of my previous videos where you show my tracks, I'm often using Trillion. Normally I use this dark round Voyager, but in this case I'm using dark Voyager square bass, just a bit more chunky. It's basically just a square wave patch from a Moog Voyager with a sub sine wave oscillator on the bottom. This is something that you could really make in any synth. It's just a simple plucky square wave bass patch. So let's jump over to the clip view and I'll show you a bit about the process of developing the bass. So you can see I've just duplicated this bass to make the sub, but this is what the bass started like. And I've shown this before in my tutorials about how I suggest that you go about like coming up with the different ideas, and why I always use the clip view basically allows me to just try a bunch of different things and then audition them back. But it's probably good for anyone who is a regular viewer of the channel to see that I actually do use the techniques that I recommend on the channel, right? So I'm basically just trying a bunch of different ideas here. something totally different there. So that's pretty close to what we ended up with. Just taking out these downbeats. I think I'm just adding a bit more velocity automation there, or variation there. All right, just making a few changes with the notes. Just trying like a simplified version. And now this is what we've got as the final version. It's basically a simplified version of what we were looking at just now. So if you've ever seen any of my previous walkthrough videos, you'll notice I am a big fan of using octaves, right? Let's pull this down, show you what it sounds like. Pretty boring, really. It's just, you know, it's a cool bass line. It will sound good in the club, but doesn't have really a lot of personality to it. So having that octave jump just really helps to add a bit of character to the bass line, in my opinion. So it's very simple, just with a few kind of switch ups and changes. Now, at some point I've decided it was necessary to have a sub in here and split the upper part of the bass and the lower part of the bass. This is something that I try to avoid, but I guess it was something that I deemed necessary in the mixing process. So they're both just doing the same thing. Over the course of my production journey, I've really come to appreciate simplicity. So if you can get a great result with one sound, one layer, go for that. If you can do more with less, then go for that. It really kind of strips away a lot of the complication of the mixing process. If you can have like strong ideas, strong elements that just really shine through in the track. Okay, so let's jump into this melodic section. Have a look at the piano. Here's the MIDI. Looks a bit crazy, but we're basically just working around G minor sevenths. So this is just kind of like a little ghost hit, and in this one I've just taken off the root note to create some kind of variation. But it's like it's a nice rhythmic pattern. It's simple but catchy. It's got this kind of push and pull feel to it. So you can hear it's really working quite well with the bass line and the groove there. I think there's a beauty in the kind of simplicity and the syncopation of it. It's working for me anyway. So what I've used for that is a piano rack from F9 Audio. It's a pack that I bought. These are great. I've got a couple of different packs from them. I will say they're kind of hard to use. So basically this is a bunch of like multi-sampled and processed pianos. F9 Audio is the Freemasons, James Wiltshire, I believe. They make really, really high quality stuff. Each preset is a different Ableton rack. So rather than flicking from one preset to the next on something like Diva, you have to reload a whole instrument, and it's got multi-samples and a bunch of processing and stuff going on in here. So it takes a little bit longer to load, and then you kind of need to tweak everything, like turn off the delay and reverb and whatnot. But if you find the right sound, the end result are pretty cool. So pretty simple processing. I'm doing some clipping on this because it was quite a strong sound, so I wanted to get it loud but without triggering the limiter too much. You'll see a bunch of these clippers throughout the mix, and they're just like taking off 1 or 2 dB here and there. It's basically like a slightly advanced mixing technique that I've been working with. Just trying to get things loud while keeping them as transparent as possible and avoiding kind of pushing the limiter as much as possible. So I've got a bit of glue compression, which is kind of shaping it a little bit, controlling the dynamics. Some chorus from Tel Chorus LX. Spreads it out, gives it some width, some LFO from LFO Tool. You can see this project is kind of old. It's from before I switched to Kickstart. So I've got a combination of LFO Tool and Kickstart in here. I guess I use both, to be honest. There's got some filtering. So I'm just kind of bringing in the piano. So that really helps to transition the energy through the track. As you can see, this has been recorded by hand. I try to do this with as many elements as possible. I'll basically draw in the automation, and then at the end I go through and automate it by hand just to give it a bit more of a humanized feel. I just feel like adding those details and that little bit of extra effort adds some kind of humanization to the end result. We've got a bit of delay from Native Instruments Replica XT. That's the piano. If I switch back to the clip view, that I've done a similar process as the bass line with just trying to find different piano ideas. So let's have a listen through to some of the ones that didn't make the cut. So there I'm trying to find like the rhythm, and I guess that's kind of the rhythm I used in the end, or the foundation of it, before I actually voice the chords. I might have used a chord device, something like that. Yeah. But it just means that instead of kind of trying to move around chords and voice different things, do it with one note and try a different thing. Yep, so the next one. Then this one. Another one. So I think a combination of those two, right, came in at the end. So now I've decided to voice the chords myself, I guess, so I can move like octaves around, voice them differently. So that's the evolution of the creative process on the chords. So I think the next interesting element here is the guitar pluck. Basically from here down, these are just kind of like little one-shots and things. So it's a lot less than it looks like. It's kind of these elements here. The guitar pluck is coming from Diva, and I believe this is something that I also used in another track, Last Word. So Last Word Stab. So the amp is giving a lot of character to this. Some chorus. This is one from D16. So I'm a big fan of chorus. I've got a whole bunch of them. It's kind of like my little production fetish, I guess, like just having a whole bunch of different choruses. I just like the way they work. I like the way they make things sound. And I like having different ones to pick from and enjoy the subtlety of each. But to be honest, I use the free one that I'm always recommending, Tal Chorus LX, a lot. So the MIDI for this, really simple. It's just basically playing a D and then a G and a D. So it kind of creates some rhythm and some intensity. The second part has higher velocity, so it kind of bounces from one to the other and creates emphasis on this last 16th of the bar to really help rhythmically in the track. So it's also playing off the octave jump in the bass. So the octave jump's playing here, and then the little guitar pluck thing is playing here. Now I've got this stab riff, which I believe started with just this Diva patch. Another one that I've taken from another track of mine, Lovely Day. Basically, when I make a cool patch, I save it, and then it gives me a starting point. I usually tweak things, but it basically means that I've got my own preset bank of my own sounds that sound like me and that I'm always enjoying in my tracks, you know? Great idea. Saves so much time and helps to give you like a signature sound. You always want to make sure that you're using new sounds as well though, otherwise everything's going to sound the same. So here's the MIDI, very simple, just one note. So I'll change this to red and then select both of these MIDI clips and we can see them together. So we can see where the piano is playing and where this chord stab is playing. So basically the chord stab is just emphasizing the second half of this piano riff. So they're really working together. Right, and I've got this layer that I added later. So the layer is another F9 audio element. Another Detroit something, but basically like a Detroit techno stab. Very cool. Love that sound. And I've just kind of layered that in on top to create a bit more emphasis for the stabs. So together they sound like this. Really nice. Adding some good kind of vibe and energy to the top of that piano. So you can see they're all working really well together. Guitar pluck. It's a real like harmonious call and response going on there. So a bunch of like really quite simple elements, all just interacting together to create something that at the end is kind of complex. Now, the kind of final main melodic element is this stab here, which has come from the Korg Minilog XD. So it's quite a resonant kind of pluck sound. This here is just the MIDI sending out to the hardware. So I use this crazy chord that I've made. And what I do when I record these is I always put the name of the patch that I've used so that I can go back and find it if I need to. But basically this is just like a recording that I've done across the whole MIDI section here, and I've just like tweaked the filter and resonance and stuff as I go to create some of that humanization. Right, so I've also tweaked the delay in the patch. The Minilog has a really cool delay, reverb and chorus section on it. So I don't use a lot of hardware, but it's kind of cool and fun to mess around with from time to time. I value working fast over any kind of real sound benefits that hardware may give, but it's nice to have the option, but absolutely not necessary in my opinion. So the next element, we're just going to kind of run through quickly. We've got a riser from Omnisphere. So it's using this Andromeda vintage poly lead, and I'm playing a chord here. So the G, D and G. So if I were to just play the G, and then I've got some overdrive on it, which makes it feel a bit more aggressive. Chorus. In this case, the chorus is kind of doing an auto pan type thing. I've got this Stereo Savage, which is a kind of a terrible plugin, to be honest. It makes things really phase, but it does sound cool. So if you're going to use this or plugins like it, I think it's really important that you only put them on elements that you feel like you can afford to lose if it gets summed to mono. So I'm kind of losing quite a bit from that. I think it's definitely phasing, but it sounds cool. And it's not a main element. Like I would never put this on the vocal or the piano or something like that. This is basically just a riser. And we've got a high string, pretty much doing a similar job, but with a different sound. Another Omnisphere, and this is a patch that I use all the time. Hollywood Studio String Section, just sounds really lush. So we just got that playing over 2 octaves. It either sounds like this, a bit too thin, not quite bright enough, so together, doing what I want. And then I'm just using some automation here to like bring it up in volume through the track. So next up, we've got a bunch of little one-shot kind of hits from a bunch of these F9 audio instruments from a pack called Club Synths, I believe. Let's have a listen. Nice pad sweep in context. So we've got that playing over 2 octaves. We've got a high one and a low one. Then we've got this pitch sweep. So you can see here in the MIDI, it's playing this note and then I'm pitch bending at the end. Cool vibe. Delay, another F9 audio with a Tantra and some Echo Boy and a bunch of stuff on it. That's really cool. What have I done here? Okay, right, so I'm playing octaves, G5, G4, G3, G2. Sounds nice. Really nice sounding patches. You can see why I got these, but as I said, they're a bit tricky to use. Then I've got all this stuff on it. So it's a pretty long delay there. And I really like using Tantra like this with the mix, just to kind of add some vibe to things. If I had the tantra all the way wet, it would sound like this. Bit much, so we just want to bring it back. So you get some of that vibe that it's adding, but without too much interference. This verb hit, atmospheric. And then this is just a loop that I found. It's kind of a weird phasey atmosphere pad type thing, and it just kind of helps to add a bit of intensity after this break. So let's have a look at the vocals. So the main vocal I've got was this deeper thing. Bunch of delay on it from Effect Rack and Little Alter Boy from Sound Toys, just pitching it down, making it sound deeper. And I've just split it onto a second audio track here. It has this little bit that comes before. I want to go deeper. So I just did that to have a bit more control, because I didn't want this to have all the delay and stuff on it, and it was just easier to split it over 2 tracks. Then I've got a sweep. So basically I've just taken a bit of this vocal and put reverb on it here. Then I take this, copy it up to the audio track, then reverse it and create this sweep. So the sweep is just using a part of the vocal as a riser, and I've done a bunch of processing to it. Added a little alter boy to pitch it back up a bit, added a vocoder to add some noise to it. And then I'm using this EQ with a lot of resonance to kind of emphasize the filter point as it's coming up. I'll bring that down, and it doesn't quite have the same intensity. Fast auto pan to just bring it out to the sides. And little plate with some additional reverb. So it's really subtle. Cool. And that's the vocals. One other thing we've got here is I've highlighted this good vocal, which you'll remember from one of the previous versions that I did. So I like to do that, and if I feel like I've got a good idea, I'll save it so that I can use it in another project. Now, wrapping things up, we've got a bunch of effects here. Crash. I've got a snare roll, which is from a sample pack. And then I've taken the first part of the snare roll and used it in this break. So I get the same effect, but not with the same intensity. I've got a fill here, and there's a bunch of different variations of this fill. So the reason that I put the fill in the effects group rather than in a drum group, which you would expect, is because I often filter my drums, and I generally want any fills or something to be playing even if the drums are filtered. Then there's just a bunch of atmospheric things: crash, impact. You know, so they're not doing too much. They're all kind of working together with different little subtle layers. And I use different variations of the layers at different points to create like slight differentiation between these drops and stuff. But they're all doing very similar things, right? This kind of percussion delay is something I use in a lot of my tracks. Another delay. Another percussion delay. Another sweep. And again, same as the crashes and the noise, I'm just kind of using some different variations of sweeps at different places to separate and differentiate each kind of drop and rise. So these are not too different from one another, but it just means that it's not the same repetitive sound happening the whole time. And then I've got one more riser, which is just happening in the main break to create a bit more intensity and emphasis in that part of the track. And this is kind of like a bit crazy. It sounds like a re-recorded reverb or something like that. It's just something I've taken from a sample pack, but pretty cool. If I turn it off and on. So this riser lead is the last thing that I've added in the effects group, I think. So cool sound, but I'm using this rack from Bassclef to filter here to open it up, and it kind of has this almost like siren alarm type sound to it. So it just really adds a bit more intensity at this main drop. So it's kind of rising up, but then fading out at the same time, which gives it quite a cool vibe, creates intensity, but also like leaves enough impact for the drop. So if we zoom out and take a more macro overview of the arrangement of the track, you'll see here that all of the breaks and drops represented by these markers. I find this really, really helpful to do for keeping myself organized when I'm arranging. I also color code different parts of my kick and bass so that I know where the low cuts are happening. It just really helps me to orientate myself in the project by having these visual cues. So in terms of the arrangement, basically I like to work around this kind of section of the track first. I feel like that's the most important part of the track. Then I'll basically create this section to lead into here. So I'll just create this intro section to basically lead up to the first drop where the bass comes in. I feel like it's been a really helpful switch for me to start arranging things in the middle rather than at the beginning. It helps me to focus on what's the main part of the track going to be, and then I just kind of work backwards from there and fill in the gaps. It kind of means that I have more simple intros and save more of my elements for the middle of the track, the main section. I'm always trying to kind of give as much as I can with the elements I'm using, but reserve as much as I can so I've always got something to give. That's kind of my mindset around the arrangement process. Alright guys, there you go. How did you enjoy that? I'm pretty stoked with this track, to be honest, and I think it's going to be in my sets for a while to come. Have you checked out the EP? Which of the 3 tracks is your favourite? Let me know in the comments. And if you're looking for something to watch next, then check out this video. I think you're going to like it. So that's it from me today. I'll catch you next time. Peace!